So I'm from Houston, Texas, and I've been an activist since 2009. I started an activist community called the Houston Freethinkers in 2010. So far, we've been the only city to successfully kick the TSA off of our buses. They tried to bring them to buses, and we're the only city to kick them out after just 2 weeks. That was in 2012. We've been involved in a lot of community gardening, raising money for various charities, confronting politicians, the whole range of activism, working within the art community, music community. So I've been doing that since 2010. I started doing journalism, freelance journalism in 2013, and now that's what I do full time. So I write for activistpost.com and Mint Press News out of Minnesota, and I do a lot of traveling. I got to cover the Silk Road trial, among others, and it's just become a full-time gig. So that's what I do, and I try to use journalism as a way to get people to recognize the problems with government and hopefully bring them to looking for solutions. And I've also recently wrote 2 books. The first one came out last year, and it's called The Conscious Resistance, Reflections on Anarchy and Spirituality, which is a little bit of my message. I guess I've sort of become known as the spiritual anarchist, and they sort of assumed that my talk was going to be about spirituality, so they put me on Sunday. So I guess I'm supposed to be your church. But my talk isn't really going to focus on that today. It's still a part of the overall message, but that'll be towards the end. So the first book came out last year. The second book is actually coming out next Friday, and it's called Fighting Freedom in an Age of Confusion. And it's basically going to be part of a trilogy of books, which the first one, like I said, it brings this synthesis of looking at traditions around the world throughout history and how they have actually had anti-authoritarian thought since the beginning. Christianity, shamanistic traditions, native traditions, the Tao, Buddhism. You can look at the origins of many of these traditions and see that they were actually really freedom-minded and freedom-based, but it's only over time that they've sort of become just like the state. The religious institutions got a hold of them and changed them. So we explore that in the first book. The second one is more dealing with just, the realities of what it's like to start questioning the nature of our world, questioning government, questioning all the various systems that interact with us. And for a lot of people, they go through a period of anger, grief. It's like, grieving. You just wake up to the world being not at all what you thought it was, and it can be a very difficult process for a lot of people. So the second book is focused on that, just essays that are about empowerment, trying to get people to see the strength that we all have within ourselves so that we can, build up and get to being able to find a more free place. Because essentially my message is that until we all do our own internal work, our own internal healing, dealing with our doubts, insecurities, and fears that we all have from, whatever, our environments and just growing up, till we deal with that, our own internal issues, there's no way that we're going to create a more free world. We can get rid of the state tomorrow, we can reduce government, but I believe until each of us do that internal healing, we're just going to either elect more people or, put more people in power, and eventually those same problems will come to the surface. So that's what the trilogy of books is going to focus on. The third one will be out next year, and you guys are basically going to get a preview of what that third book is. That's what I'm going to talk about today. It's going to be pretty much a manual on how to exit the state, how to become more free. I haven't paid taxes in 5 years, and I promote that openly because I think it's an empowering thing that more people need to be willing to take those steps. Not everybody's able to, and that's fine, but I've been able to, through my journalism, I get paid in Bitcoin, and most of my income is completely in the counter economy, which is what we're going to talk about today. Yesterday, I don't know if you guys, for anyone here who was at the lunch yesterday when Jeff Dice spoke from the Mises Institute, and I really enjoyed some of the things he was asking libertarians, both big L and little L, those associated with the party and those just doing various forms of libertarian activism, for us to be honest and to look at our actions and to evaluate the return, the investment that we put in and what we get from that. What forms of activism are working the best. I can say for the Houston Freethinkers, we started out a lot. There was, a lot of younger people. I'm 30 years old. I started that when I was 25, so there was people my age and people older. There was a lot of anger at that time, 2010, 2011, 12. So there was a lot of protesting, going out to the streets, the Occupy movement, all these sort of things. Over time, we get less and less people who come to the group now asking to protest. They want to come and they want to find solutions. They want to know how they can get involved in their community. And I feel like that's just part of us as a group being able to see, well, did the protesting get us anything that we wanted? We got out there, we met new people, we raised awareness in some ways. We were able to confront politicians and senators, et cetera, but the NDA was still passed. The internet bills continue to march forward. All these things that we were trying to raise awareness or hoping that we could slow down, they continued, and they still continue. But when I look at my actions involved in the community farm and I see, this return of produce that allows people in the Fifth Ward, one of Houston's poorest neighborhoods, to come in there and to pick their vegetables and greens in a neighborhood where there's no no grocery stores at all. All they have is, corner stores with it's what's considered a food desert. When I see that, to me, that is a return that I can see. That's a value that I can see. Wow, my time, my energy, and the community that I work with, we put that in there, and we can get something back from that. So I think it's important for us to do that, to start evaluating our actions and to see if, electoral politics, voting, even within the third party, if it's getting us what we want, and if not, to reconsider and to look at other strategies. And today I'm going to talk about two different strategies that I think everyone in this room, to various degrees, could employ in their own lives to make their lives more fruitful, more free from the state, and to empower ourselves and our local community. So the idea, I'm kind of borrowing it from Per Bylund. He's a Swedish Austrian economist. He writes for Mises occasionally. And he wrote this essay in 2006 that apparently nobody paid attention to, but I discovered it because I just dig around a lot on the internet, and I'm a nerd for this stuff. And he talks about vertical and horizontal agorism, or what he calls introvert and extrovert. So I'm going to explain what these ideas are and give you examples of them, and hopefully by the end of this you guys can have some ideas for ways that you can empower yourself. So the first one, what he called vertical, or the introvert strategy, he based those ideas off of another activist, libertarian activist, who some of you may know. His name's Karl Hess. He's since deceased, but in the 60s and the 70s and in the 80s he was very active. In the 60s, when it was the New Left student movement and the old right, Murray Rothbard, a lot of libertarians, this is before the Libertarian Party was even created, a lot of them were active on campuses, and Karl Hess was among those people. And for a brief period in time, the left and the right aligned, and there was the Journal of Left and Right. Murray Rothbard wrote that for 3 or 4 years. They had 2 conferences where they tried to bring communists and socialists and libertarian anarchists together to varying degrees of success. But Karl Hess was involved in a lot of that. He started out as a speechwriter for Barry Goldwater, and then went, into anarchist milieu, and then kind of went back a little bit this way. But by the end of his life, towards the end of his life, he moved to Washington, D.C., to the Adams Morgan neighborhood, and he was able to completely transform this neighborhood. He wrote a book called Community Technology, which I think is worth pursuing for anyone who's interested in community building, community technology. And in the book, they detail how they were able to start various community networks. They started rooftop gardens. They started aquaponics systems in people's basements. He was really big on tools and technology, and saying that the tools were what allowed people to be free. Being able to share tools is what allows people access to the means of production, to creating things, to becoming an entrepreneur. Without tools, you're essentially you're unable to do a lot of things. So he created this system where they had a collection of community tools that anybody could come and borrow, a tool share basically. And so his book describes the successes and the failures of that. It lasted for about 4 or 5 years, and he's very open about where they failed, what they could have done better, and what succeeded, and how he was able to do that. So that, using those ideas, building community networks, being involved in urban farming, community gardens, farmers market, even these are the vertical, the introvert strategy. And the reason they're introverted, you'll see in a moment, the extroverted strategy is for those who are maybe a little bit more bold and ready to go to do things which are considered illegal by the state. But in this, anybody, no matter where you live, whatever your background is, you can start to purchase less of your groceries from the grocery store, from this food production systems that really don't serve any of us, and whether you're a meat eater or not, we can all admit that the current mass food production with pesticides, with genetically modified foods, and just with the mistreatment of animals is not what I think any compassionate libertarian would truly support. So my goal is to get people to question not only the mechanisms that rule us through the state, but looking at all the various forms of control and influence that are put upon us, and which ways we can liberate ourselves from those. So I don't like having to go to the grocery store and be dependent on food that is coming from California or from some other state and has to be trucked thousands of miles, and all this energy has to go into it, when I can take a 10-minute walk to the community farm by my house, and I can go pick all of my vegetables, and know that I'm providing a source of income for the people there at that local community, and I'm keeping that project going. To me, that's more rewarding, and it's more in line with my values. And that's ultimately what I'm trying to do, is to make my life in line with the values that I believe, not just talk about them and not just hope that one day a politician is going to give me the opportunity to create that life. I want to create that life now. So we can do that. We can start to become less dependent on grocery stores and start going to farmers markets or looking for local producers of, I love mushrooms, so I've been searching in Houston I found one source so far for mushrooms that are grown in the Houston area that don't have to drive too far, and the past 2 weeks I've been putting more and more energy into that, and I haven't gone to the grocery store but for a couple of items, and that's something that is a personal goal of mine. But that's just one example of, a way that you can start to reduce your dependence on these systems. So the horizontal strategy, the extrovert strategy, it comes from the philosophy, the strategy of Samuel Edward Konkin III. He wrote a book called The New Libertarian Manifesto and the Agoras Primer. Those are two really helpful books. And his ideas were agorism, counter-economics. So he takes the term agorism from the Greek word agora for the marketplace. And in Konkin's view, agorism, his philosophy was libertarianism to the fullest extent, to the actual application of the ideas. So his strategy was basically saying, instead of trying to vote them out or believing that we can somehow, have a violent revolution and actually fight the state and succeed, we can compete with the state itself, not competing within their system, but compete with that system completely. And his way to do this was what he called counter-economics. And so the counter-economy is basically any area of trade of the economy that the state either says is unfavorable or illegal. So these are gray and black markets. So every time you get a haircut from a friend, or you pay your neighbor to mow your lawn, or you do something like that, and there's no licenses, there's no businesses, registration involved, that's the gray market. You're taking power away from the state in that small way because there's no taxes going back into that system. And so that's the gray market, and the black market would be, again, things that the state considers illegal. So your pot dealer, the Silk Road was black market activity. These are things that whether or not we think that they're morally right or not, they're currently illegal by the state. And Konkin's idea was, if we start going into the gray and black markets and creating networks for people to exchange outside of the Federal Reserve note, then we will remove economic power from them. And he wrote this in the 70s, early 80s, way before Bitcoin was around. But in the book, he talks about, recognizing that computers were just starting to become a big thing. And he predicted that technology would play a big role in taking us to this. And look at what Bitcoin has done. Bitcoin's only the beginning of what's possible. So that's taking your power out of the mainstream economy, the statist economy. And I think the fullest application of agorism, though, would be not only to have exchanges that don't involve the state, like gray markets. I have a gardening business in Houston. It's a team of activists, volunteers, and we build gardens for people around the city. We've never got a business license. We don't ever plan to. It's just communication with other free individuals. Hey, I'm looking for a garden. Okay, this is what we can do. We agree on a price. We come over, we build it. End of story. There's no middleman, no third party involved. That is gray market activity, and I think that's powerful. But I also believe that the next step in that would be then to stop using the Federal Reserve note. Our business accepts silver, we accept Bitcoin, and that, I think, is whenever we're really challenging the state, which is why, what we saw with the Silk Road trial. I just want to mention that the reason I really believe in this theory, not only because I see it playing out and I study various downfalls of statist economy and see that people always flood the black and gray markets, regardless if the state's there or not. We're going to find a way to exchange. We're going to find a way to trade things, trade our goods, and that is the counter economy. We can be proactive and we can start building those networks now, or we can wait till things get worse and hope that FEMA comes and help us, or we can go try to fight for people with food at the grocery stores, or we can be the people that thought ahead and tell people, here's some seeds, here's some supplies, get yourself started, And that's what I want to do. I don't want to be left in a position waiting for the state to take care of me. But this strategy, this idea, it's dangerous. It's dangerous to the state. And the state themselves said that. The judge in Ross's case specifically, both the ideas that Ross believed in and that the quotes from Dread Pirate Roberts expressed an interest in agorism and moving the economy out of the state and giving people the power back. It was an experiment in agorism. And the judge specifically said one of the reasons she punished Ross so harshly was because his philosophy, the ideas were dangerous. And she just wanted to make sure that anybody who would dare take up his flag would, be sent a signal that they would be punished harshly. And to me, that shows that they're afraid of that. It wasn't just about getting people access to drugs. It was about, this is the beginning of being able to have free exchanges where they can't touch them, And that's what, the Silk Road, to me at least, that's what I took out of it, is that they're afraid that people are starting to find ways to move money out of their economy and to start organizing in peaceful ways that they don't like. So they can frame it, it's about drugs, it's about, murder accusations or whatever, but the reality is they're afraid that they're losing power. And I think that's important to recognize that this philosophy, these ideas, they can be effective, but they're going to take a lot of groundwork and a lot of building. So how do we do this? How do we build the vertical or the horizontal strategy, whether you choose to be involved in your local economy, and get involved with farmers markets, urban gardening, etc., or just supporting those systems. If not everybody wants to be in the dirt, and I understand that. I love to garden. I love to be out there and get my hands dirty. It's not for everybody, but you can support those systems. Like I said, you can start to lessen your dependence on the mainstream economy and the mainstream forms of governance and food production and all these, and security. Start community protection networks, all these different ideas. But how do we get to that point? How can we, as an individual, come to the place where we're able to enjoy these new networks? I believe that one of the keys to doing this is a concept called freedom cells, which I picked up from John Bush, and John took it from Bob Podolsky, who wrote a book called Flourish about hierarchy and about government. And Bob Podolsky, basically him and his partner, they studied for years and years, tried to understand human relationships and the way people work. And they discovered that people work best in groups of 8 people plus or minus one or so 7 to 9 people, basically, somewhere in that range. And he also believed that it would be best to have these groups divided equally, male and female. But he said, when you start to go a little bit lower than that, or too many people beyond that, your effectiveness starts to taper off. You're less effective, and people don't communicate as well. So that was his target number: is building groups of 8 people, what he called octologs, what we call freedom cells, centered around various specific goals. What I want to do is take this concept, and we've already started building it in Houston. We've got, within the Houston Freethinkers community I mentioned, we've taken people who are already involved in that, who are, really diehard and ready to, let's start talking about building this next networks. So we started meeting, and the freedom cell idea is basically that you have 8 individuals. You want to diffuse the power and the knowledge among those individuals. So maybe today your freedom cell says, let's build a community garden. So the 8 of you go at that, and you just accomplish something really awesome in a matter of a couple hours. Maybe you guys meet every couple weeks and you say, okay, let's all learn as much as we can about aquaponics. Next week we'll meet and we'll teach each other. So there's so many different ways that this structure can be used. It's also one of the things that John kind of got me on is having this core group of people who are equally knowledgeable and equally prepared as you. So you get your freedom cell, and everybody's got 3 months worth of backup supply of food for emergencies of all types. Everybody's got a form of encrypted communication. Everybody is proficient in the use of firearms. Everyone, we got food. What was the other one? Backup food, encryption. What else are we doing? There's other things. There's other skills that we're getting. But basically the idea is that everybody, that you're not dependent on one individual. So I move, I leave, or I just become uninterested in the freedom cell. The other 7 people are still able to continue their work. Everybody maybe knows CPR. Everybody has a certain amount of safety skills. So whatever project you're taking on, it's not dependent on one person, So it's a non-hierarchical situation. Everybody's going to have various strengths and weaknesses, and that's fine. It's not about, trying to force equality through some, illegitimate means. It's just about establishing that we're on the same base, that I can at least count that, say the shit hits the fan, that everybody in my freedom cell, we meet up and we have some sort of plan. And, everybody there, I know that they have food for themselves. They can fend for themselves. We're not all going to have to take care of one of those people, And so the idea is you start establishing the freedom cells. You get your main cell, right, and then every individual also starts another freedom cell within their own community and within their own direct community. And eventually you have maybe 8 to 10 freedom cells of 8 to 10 people each. So you've got 80 to 100 people right there, maybe scattered around your city. And this just starts to grow. And in the New Libertarian Manifesto, Konkin predicted that we would go from where we are, statism. He had 4 stages towards agorism, or towards freedom. And he predicted that these little pockets of agoras, these communities, would start to pop up. And at first, it would be, you kind of slowly venture into that. And ironically, he also said that he thought that if anybody moved too quickly or too boldly, that the state would smash them down. And that might be an example of the Silk Road. So he was also kind of adamant about being weary and being careful that, at these stages as we progress, as the state becomes weaker and as statism fails and more people awaken to this message, which I think is all of our hope, then people are going to start looking for other options. As we're building these free communities and these networks of people who are not having to use the Federal Reserve note, because ultimately, no matter what we want to do is end the Federal Reserve, audit the Fed, whatever, they're not going to do it within their system. And we can complain about it all day, but as long as we're using that Federal Reserve note, then we're still supporting it. And that to me was a really just an eye-opening thing. Like, wow, if I really don't support these various systems, whatever it may be, then I need to find a way to reduce my dependence on them. And I think that that's what this is a tool for, is establishing that. So one of the criticisms that I want to put out there as far as of Konkin's ideas and agorism, after he wrote the New Libertarian Manifesto, Murray Rothbard criticized. They had a couple of essays back and forth where they were just discussing the ideas. And even yesterday when I spoke with Jeff Dice of Mises, he sort of said that he felt it's an edgy thing, but it doesn't necessarily speak to the masses. And that's what Rothbard said, is like the majority of people are wage workers and they can't just give up everything to go work in the black and gray markets. And I completely empathize with that, and I do agree. I think the stage that we're at now is it's going to take individuals like myself and others who, for whatever reason, they're either brave enough or they just have the freedom. I'm 31 years old, I'm not married, I have no kids, and I'm willing to take these risks to do certain things that I think are important for us to lay the groundwork so that others, as we progress forward, it won't be so difficult. Like John and Kat, they've drove all around the country using Bitcoin, and there's been a lot of hiccups, right? But as that has gone, they've learned a lot. They taught other people about, hey, this doesn't work. This is the way to do this if you're trying to use Bitcoin, to pay for this. There's going to be people like that who sort of, trailblaze and show us the way. And I believe as this progresses and more of these little pockets of free communities and free-minded networks around the country and really around the world start to pop up, people aren't blind. They're going to look and they're going to see themselves being heavily taxed and the state telling them how to live. And then they're going to look over here and see their friends living a lot more fruitfully and happily and not being stolen from constantly. And I believe that's when we will see more of an exodus from the system. Of course, Konkin always predicted. He said something that revolution, if anything is certain, it's a revolution, and he means by that the state would eventually probably try to stop free-minded people. But I try to push forward without worry for that, because I think that if we constantly are stuck in the fear and we're paralyzed by the what-ifs of what is the state going to do, or it doesn't mean we should be ignorant and that we should take bold steps that aren't going to lead to our goals, but we should absolutely be unwavering in our commitment to freedom. And that's what I believe Agorism is a strategy towards. Jeff also told me, he said, some people want to live, the way he phrased it, he's like, I want to live my vanilla life, my soccer mom, my suburban life, which is totally fine. I don't think that there's anything in this Agoras strategy that says that everybody needs to live like pirates in the black and gray market. Some of us enjoy that lifestyle and want to go that direction. But I have a vision of thousands of autonomous communities interlocking, working together, empowered individuals who recognize the non-aggression principle, who recognize the value of life in all its forms, trading and exchanging with each other. And that's going to include people who, maybe you have Christian communities, maybe, everybody can still live the way they want to. I think without the state, you would actually that's when you would have the freedom to choose to live as you want. And we wouldn't be forced to deal with things and to accept things that go against our principles. And for those who, maybe you're more of a constitutionalist, you're not necessarily interested in seeing the state devolve or be abolished, just simply reduce. I think as Agoras, we're just trying to help people vacate the state and live free. We're not trying to say that, hey, you need to be an anarchist too. I am an anarchist. I'm definitely not, here to say to vote. I'm trying to build something that is outside the state that I think Agorism helps us get to that. We can lay the groundwork to something new, not to the next state, and not even to say, hey, the rest of you need to be anarchists too. If you choose to live under the state and you just want it to get back to a constitutional form, or you just want it to be reduced in some way, that's fine. We can all live our own visions, and this is more of what is called panarchism, anarchism without adjectives, basically a bunch of communities coexisting without having to force their view upon each other. And my final point here is that, as I said, this is happening in Houston. I'm going to be speaking several times this month, and I'm really putting my intention out there and hope that other people who are interested in these ideas will come forth. As I said, we have the Houston Freedom Cell. It's, me, people younger than me, people older than me. We have a good mix of people who are interested in these ideas, who are interested in getting land. And I'm putting it out there that by the end of this year, we would like to launch a homesteading project, an intentional community that is built upon the principles of non-aggression, on permaculture, working in balance with the planet, and mindfulness of trying to create these more conscious communities. And we're going to document the whole process and show people that, hey, even in the face of the state, you can still create a community that is based on your values, in line with your values, and get as free as possible. Obviously, unfortunately, we still have to pay property taxes, but I think there may come a point where we can become strong enough and the state will be weak enough that we could say, hey, you know what, this year we're not going to pay, and maybe that's down the line. But that's my vision. I want to create these conscious communities that can be built around sustainability, the non-aggression principle, libertarian values, and trying to help other people. I don't want to just get to my free place and then turn my back on the rest of the world, because I've come to understand that as much as I'm an individual, that I'm seeking collective liberation through individual means, and I can't necessarily live happily and free knowing that everyone else I care about is still, dealing with all this crap from the state, and that good people are rotting in prison. We have to find a way to break down their power, and I think that boldest way we can do that is to live free, to not wait for another time, but to do it now and to create these communities. I'm definitely interested in talking with people who want more information on this. And I want to get back to my first point, which was evaluating our actions. Whenever I talk about this, sometimes people will tell me, well, why can't I vote and do what you're saying? And I think you can. You can choose to use your time however you please. But for me, and the energy I see even here with the good people here who are trying to work in a third-party system. I mean, yesterday we heard the numbers. The numbers are horrible. We have to be honest. Like 1%. This party's been around for 46 years and it hasn't gained, anywhere close to the 5% that everybody's hoping in order to get to the next level. And I'm not saying that we should give up on that. I just think that what's important, again, to evaluate your actions and the investment versus the return. So when you go to your community garden, if you start investing in your community itself, meeting your neighbors, talking, just breaking down all these false barriers that have been really foisted upon us, and in some ways we choose to divide ourselves. We look at ourselves as libertarians, and the rest of them must be statists, or the rest of them must, they can't be like me. But I think it's important for us to find that common ground in our communities, build those relationships, and then at the end of the day, at the end of the year, when the election comes and Hillary or Trump or whoever's elected, ask yourself, look at how much time and energy you put into voting, into looking for a candidate, whether it's third party or otherwise, and then look at what you've been able to build in your community and see what gave you a better value, better results out of that, and be honest about it and be willing to say, if your time voting wasn't valuable, or even if I'm wrong, if your community sucks and you didn't get anything out of it, unfortunately that might happen. Sometimes you have to build it. That's what I felt like I had to do. I met a lot of awesome people in Houston. There was a lot of good people doing things, but they weren't doing them the way that I thought it needed to be done. So we just built a community, and it became this awesome activist community. And now we're ready to take it to the next stage of actually building a community that has land that we can open up to other people, that we can have monthly farmers markets, that we can have workshops and skill shares and teach people how to take care of themselves as we learn to do it. Because I'm not speaking from any sort of all-knowing point at all. Like this is all a learning lesson for me, and these are things that are being built right now. I just want to remind again that Agorism is powerful, counter-economics is powerful. The state knows that. They put Ross away because of that, and it's time for more of us to be bold in that way, to go in the direction, not to create another Silk Road, but to get involved, whether vertically or horizontally, in your community, and to finding strategies that can take power away from the state and bring the power back to the people. And as I said earlier, I'm sort of the spiritual anarchist. My last point would be that nothing I said today matters at all until we start working on whatever is wrong in here, all the healing that we need to do as individuals. And I say that pretty confidently, knowing that of all the people I've talked to over the years, there's at all different backgrounds, everybody's got some issue that they're working through, and it expresses itself in different ways, and that's just being a human being. The more that we're open about that and we try to deal with whatever insecurities and things we need to heal from, the stronger we're going to be, the more powerful we're going to be, the more liberated we will be in here and physically. And that's when these things will happen. So until we're ready to do that, I don't think that we will be able to create those communities. But I hope that in the next year we can show you guys what it's like to build a conscious Agora. Thank you guys.